At 12 minutes past 4 on the Saturday morning, I was sitting on the edge of my bed with the laptop on my knees, watching a number that should have been 0. Failed returns, 190. I refreshed it, 212. Cara rolled over and asked, without opening her eyes, whether it was the bad kind. And I said yes. And she said okay, and went back to sleep, which after 9 years is the closest thing we have to a language. Every one of those returns belonged to a waste disposal firm somewhere in the country, and every one of them was due with the regulator by midnight Sunday. 212 small businesses whose quarterly filing had gone from 90% complete to invalid overnight, because every waste code they had entered no longer pointed at anything. I opened the live code list to see what it looked like, and it looked lovely. Clean, new, correctly formatted, 140 entries, and not one of them matching the identifiers that 3,000 half-finished returns were built on top of. My phone went off in my hand. Rufus, from support, who does not phone people, ever, and whose first words were that the out-of-hours mailbox had 43 messages on it, and one of them was a man crying. Behind him I could hear his kettle. I told him I was up. He asked if Bram was up. I said Bram is getting married in 9 hours and his phone is in a basket in a farmhouse in Wales, and Rufus went quiet for long enough that I could hear his kitchen clock. I work for a company called Stanwyck, and Stanwyck makes exactly one thing that matters. The product waste disposal firms file their statutory returns through. Skip Hire Outfits, Clinical Waste Hauliers, 2 of the big regional operators, about 400 customers, all of whom have a legal duty to tell the regulator what they moved and where it went. Miss the window, and they get fined. Miss it because your software ate your paperwork, and they get fined anyway, and then they phone you. 2 developers own that product. Me and Bram. That is not a boast. It is a staffing level. My personal stake in all of this was a mortgage application sitting in underwriting on a small end of terrace with a garden the length of a bus, and the underwriter wanted a letter about my salary, and that was the whole of my ambition that summer. What I owned was the code list and the filing engine. The code list is the boring heart of everything. A table that says this waste type maps to that box on the regulator's form. Change it, and every customer's forms change, immediately, everywhere, because there is one live copy, and everyone reads from it. When it goes out to all 400 at once, and there is no button that puts the old one back. There is no old one. Publishing writes over the top of what was there. I had said that sentence in various rooms so many times that it had stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like the weather. My manager was Ellis. In my own head, I called him Cathedral, because his answer to anything that took longer than a fortnight was the same. Let's not build a cathedral here. He had a thing he did before saying no, which was to take off his glasses, fold them, and set them on the table in front of him, and then never pick them up again for the rest of the meeting. So he spent half his working life squinting at people out of principle. And I will say this for him, because it was true. He knew every customer by name. He once spent a Saturday on the phone with a 2-lorry outfit in Cumbria talking a terrified woman through a late filing, line by line, for 4 hours, and never mentioned it afterwards. That was a real thing he did. I have to keep hold of it, or the rest of this sounds like a cartoon. The Friday before all this started, back in February, I spent an afternoon in the paging service pruning alarms. That is the tool that phones you at night. We paid for it per person, which meant that unlike everything else in the building, it had 1 login per human being with your actual name on it. And when you switched an alarm off, it made you type a reason in a little box before it would let you out. I remember switching off one that fired every time a customer uploaded a spreadsheet bigger than 10 megabytes and typing, meaningless, replaced with disk check, into the box, and thinking that the box was the single most well-designed thing I had ever used, because it made you say out loud what you were doing. Then I went and got a sandwich. The meeting where all of this was decided happened on a Thursday in March, in the small room with the broken blind, and it happened because I put it on the agenda myself. I had a piece of paper with 4 lines on it, which for me is an epic. I started with the log. I said, look, on the 11th someone published a change to the code list at 10 past 6 in the evening. And here is what the record says about who did it. And I turned my laptop around and let them read it. And what it said was the name of the shared account, which is the account with the company name as the username, which is the account whose password lived in the shared vault, which is the account that all 8 of us used all day every day because it was the only one that could do anything useful. I said the log is not a log. It is a piece of paper with our company's name written on it 4,000 times. If someone breaks the live code list on a Tuesday afternoon, we cannot tell you which of 8 people did it. And more to the point, neither can they, because half the time we are all logged in as the same person and none of us can remember what we clicked. Emeka, who tests everything and trusts nothing, said out loud that she had found 2 changes in January she could not attribute to a human being and had assumed they were hers. Cormac, who keeps the servers alive, said that as far as the machines were concerned, the 8 of us were one very productive man with a sleep disorder. That got a laugh, and I let it run, and then I said the second part, which was the part that mattered. I said the shared account can publish the live code list. Any of us, anytime, one click, straight out to all 400 customers. And when it goes over the top of what was there. There is no previous copy kept anywhere. There is no undo. I said Bram wrote something years ago that is supposed to rebuild the list out of the archive, and it has never been run against the live product. Not once, not in a test, not as a drill, and neither of us can promise you it works. I said give the 8 of us our own logins so we can see who did what, and give me 2 weeks to build a proper way back, so that when someone publishes the wrong thing on a Friday, we can put the right thing back on the Friday. Ellis took off his glasses. He folded them. He set them on the table. He said he heard me, and then he said the sentence. Let's not build a cathedral here. He said the shared account had been in place for 6 years and nothing had ever gone wrong with it, which is a thing people say about shared accounts the way they say it about ladders. He said individual logins meant a permissions project, and a permissions project meant 6 weeks, and we did not have 6 weeks because the regional operator demonstration was in April, and that deal was the whole year. And then he said the thing that actually got me, which was that he did not love the framing, because it sounded like I was accusing my own colleagues of something, and he trusted the people in this building, and did I not? I said this is not about trust, it is about being able to answer a question. If the wrong list goes live at 6 in the evening, I need to know 2 things fast. Which list was there before, and who put the new one there? Right now I can answer neither, and one of those is a legal problem for our customers, not for us. Ellis said that if it ever happened we would deal with it then, that he was not going to spend the spring on plumbing, and that he needed me on the demonstration work, and he asked me to write it up as a risk so it was captured somewhere, which is a way of saying no while sounding like a filing cabinet. Emeka caught me in the corridor afterwards and said, in writing please, and not to Ellis, to Astrid, and put a date on it. Rufus messaged me a picture of a bin. Cormac sent a message to the group chat at 5:30 that said, for the record, if the code list ever gets overwritten, I will be able to tell you exactly what time it happened and absolutely nothing else. And Emeka replied with a single full stop. And that thread sat there in the chat all summer like a wet coat nobody hangs up. I wrote it up. 2 paragraphs, sent to Ellis and copied to Astrid, our chief technology officer, who was at that point 3 weeks into the job and reading about 1,100 emails a day. It got a thumbs up. I have thought about that thumbs up more than is healthy. April went the way Ellis wanted. The demonstration landed, the regional operator signed. There was warm wine in plastic cups in the kitchen area, and Ellis gave a little speech in which he thanked the team for keeping it lean. In May, Bram got engaged, and the whole team signed a card, and Bram told me over a pint that he was taking 3 weeks off around it, and that he had written down the rebuild steps for the code list in a document. And I said good. And he said, well, most of them. And I said which ones are missing. And he said the ones you would only know if you had done it. And then he changed the subject to whether a marquee was worth the money. In June, Emeka joined, a genuinely bright lad 2 years out of university, and on his second day someone gave him the shared vault so he could get into the product, because that is how it worked. In June, also, I found out that the alarm that fires when the live code list changes outside a scheduled window had stopped firing. I noticed because I published a small change on a Wednesday afternoon and my phone stayed quiet, and I thought about it for maybe 90 seconds, and then a customer rang about something else. Nobody looked at the alert list again until August. At 3:30 on the Saturday morning my phone had gone off twice, and I had slept through both, because the alarm that would have made a proper noise was not the one that fired. What woke me was the third one, the dumb one. The count of failed submissions crossing 100. And by the time I had the laptop open, it was 212, and by 4:20 it was 308, because the automatic overnight validation was working its way through every draft return in the system and cheerfully marking each one invalid. one firm at a time, like a man going down a street pulling out flowers. Cormac got on the call at 4:35, on a landline, in a dressing gown, audibly. He had the answer to the only question he could ever answer. The live code list was overwritten at 7 minutes past 7 on Friday evening, by the shared account. I asked who had been in the building at 7 on a Friday. He said he had no way of knowing, and neither did the product. And then he said, out loud, to nobody, that this was the exact thing in the March thread. I called Rufus back and told him to stop replying to the mailbox individually and get one message out to everyone. And while he did that, I tried the first thing. The archive keeps a copy of every published code list, so I took Friday's earlier version and published it again. It took 11 seconds. It fixed nothing, and it took me a horrible 60 seconds to understand why. And then Emeka, who had joined the call from her kitchen with her hair still flat on one side, said it before I did. The returns do not point at the codes by name. They point at internal identifiers, and the identifiers got regenerated when the new list went in. Republishing the old list gave us the old list with brand new numbers on it. 3,000 drafts were still hanging in the air pointing at numbers that had been thrown away on Friday evening and did not exist anywhere in the world anymore. I said, out loud, the thing I had said in the March meeting, which is that there is no way back from a publish, because publishing does not put a new copy next to the old copy. It writes over the old copy, and nobody has ever tried to reverse it, including me. Second attempt, Cormac's idea, was the overnight backup of the whole database. This is the point in the story where a normal person says, well, restore the backup, and here is why we did not. The most recent one finished at 6 on Friday morning, 22 hours earlier. Restoring it would have deleted every genuine piece of work every customer had done on Friday and Saturday, including the 90-odd returns that had actually been filed successfully and accepted by the regulator, which would have made those filings vanish while the receipts stayed real. Cormac also mentioned, in the flattest voice imaginable, that a full restore of that volume from cold storage runs somewhere between 5 and 6 hours, and it was now 5 in the morning, and the deadline was midnight Sunday. And if it went wrong, we would have burned the entire day and be worse off. Emeka said, and this is the tester in her, that we did not know whether the restore worked either, because we had never done one. Two things in the same building that nobody had ever tested, sitting next to each other like a pair of shoes. Ellis arrived on the call at 6. You could hear that he had come down the stairs at speed. He asked what our position was, and I told him the position was that the live code list had been replaced. 300 and some returns were already invalid and climbing. We could not put the old list back because publishing had written over it and the identifiers were gone. And the one person who had ever thought about how to rebuild it from the archive was Bram, who was getting married at 1 o'clock. There was a pause of about 4 seconds and Ellis said, in a slightly higher voice, get him on the phone. I said his phone is in a basket. His fiancée sent a message on Thursday, half joking. That phone's go in the basket at the door and nobody is being an exception. Ellis said find the venue. So at 6:30 on a Saturday morning I sat in my kitchen Googling a farmhouse in Powys, and Cara made me eat toast standing up, and I got a landline number off a page that also advertised alpaca trekking. And at 7:10 a woman answered who was very kind and very firm and said the wedding party were not up and she was not waking a groom. Meanwhile the third attempt, which was mine, and which is the one I will remember when I am old. If we could not fix the list, maybe we could fix the returns. I opened one firm, a clinical waste operator in Kent with 211 lines on their quarterly return, and I repointed every line by hand at the new identifiers, checking each mapping against the regulator's guidance, so we did not accidentally file 200 lines of nonsense in someone else's name. It took me 40 minutes, and it worked, and for about 90 seconds I felt like a genius. And then I did the arithmetic out loud on the call. 400 customers. 40 minutes each. 2 of us. Cormac said he would take half. He logged in to do it. And I got thrown out of the product mid-keystroke, and my session died. And it took both of us a good minute to work out why. And when we did, Emeka actually laughed, one horrible bark of a laugh. The shared account only holds one session at a time. 6 years of 8 people using one login. And the reason we had never noticed is that we were never all working in it at once. 2 of us could not repair customers in parallel, because as far as the product was concerned, there was only one of us, and he could only be in one place. Ellis was on the call for that. He did not say anything. Cormac said, very politely, that if we had 8 logins we would have 8 pairs of hands right now. And the silence went on a bit too long. At 9:30, Rufus, who had been in the support mailbox since 4 and had by then spoken to a man who owned 9 tippers and thought he was going to lose his license, said something almost in passing that saved us. He said, "Is the code list not just the spreadsheet?" Because on Monday he had sent a copy of the current codes to a customer as an attachment in a ticket because they had asked for it to check their own paperwork. The Monday version. The real, live, pre-Friday list, sitting in an email in a support ticket, with all the original identifiers in the first column, because Rufus had exported it lazily and completely. I want to be honest about how that felt, because it was not triumph. It was the specific nausea of realizing that the only surviving copy of the thing your entire product depends on was a spreadsheet a support lad had emailed a customer about something else entirely. We still needed Bram. The rebuild is not just putting the numbers back. There is a step where the returns get relinked, and that step was in the half of the document he had not written down. At 11:15, the farmhouse landline rang out to me, and it was Bram, and I could hear a Hoover and a woman laughing somewhere behind him, and he said, in a voice that was already braced, "Tell me." I told him in about 40 seconds. He said, "Right." And then he talked me through it, and I sat with the laptop on the kitchen table and my phone wedged against my ear reading each step back to him like a man landing a plane, and at one point he said, "No, stop, not that one. That one looks like it works, and it will silently drop anything filed today, and I have never in my life been so glad that a person exists." He talked to me for 55 minutes on his wedding day, standing in a hallway in Wales, and at the end of it he said he had to go because someone was shouting about buttonholes, and I said congratulations, and he said, "Get it in before midnight tomorrow," and hung up. We got 361 customers filed by 9 on the Sunday evening. 39 did not make it, mostly the ones whose returns were most complicated, and every one of those got a fine, and Stanwyck paid all of them, and 2 of them left anyway. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, the big room, blinds up because it was already hot. Astrid at the head of the table with a notepad, Cormac gray and unshaven, Annika with her arms folded, Rufus who had slept about 9 hours in 3 days, Ellis in a clean shirt, and Emeka down the far end with his laptop closed in front of him like a man holding it shut. Astrid said, without any warm-up at all, "Walk me through it." Cormac gave the timings. 7 minutes past 7 Friday, shared account, code list overwritten. Astrid asked who published it, and Cormac said the product cannot tell us, and Astrid put her pen down and said, "Say that again slowly." That is when Emeka said it was him. He said it very clearly, to Astrid, and to be fair to him, he did not soften it at all. He said he had been asked to push the new quarterly code list. He had been told to use the office account because that is what it was for. He had checked the file twice against the regulator's document. He had clicked publish at 7 because he wanted it done before the weekend, and there had been no warning on the screen, and no second step and nothing that suggested it was going to all 400 customers on top of their live work. He said, and this is the line that stuck to the ceiling, "I thought that was the normal way to do it." That was the horror of it. He had used the shared login exactly as designed, for exactly the job it was there for, and it had done exactly what we built it to do. Ellis went first with the version where this was a supervision failure. A junior 3 weeks in, unsupervised, publishing to live on a Friday evening, and he was not going to pretend that was acceptable, and there would be a conversation about who had handed a new starter that level of access. Astrid asked who had handed it to him. Ellis said access was managed by the team. Annika said, to the table, that the team had one login and everybody had it, and that she had raised 2 changes in January she could not attribute to a human being. So Ellis went again, and this was the second round, and it was smoother. He said we should be careful about hindsight. He said in 6 years there had never been an incident of this type, that the shared account was a legacy arrangement inherited long before he arrived, and that nobody, at any point, had brought him a proposal with a plan and a cost attached. He put his glasses on the table. He said, and I could see him settling into it, that the real failure was that there was nothing in place to catch it. He said if we had had an alarm on the live code list, any alarm at all, we would have known at 7 minutes past 7 instead of 3:30 in the morning, and the whole thing would have been a bad hour rather than a bad weekend. And that in his view that was the gap, and that was what we should be fixing. There was a small, awful silence in which everybody looked at their hands. I opened my laptop, turned it round, and pushed it into the middle of the table. That's the alert list. Look at the March line. Astrid pulled it towards her. It is not a complicated page. It is a list of alarms, and next to each one it says whether it is switched on, and if it is switched off it says who switched it off, and when, and whatever they typed in the little box that will not let you leave until you have typed something. She read it out, because she is that sort of person, and because we all needed to hear it in someone else's voice. Live code list changed outside scheduled window. Muted, 4th of March. Muted by Ellis. Reason, as typed. Too noisy during demonstration week. We'll revisit. Ellis's hand went towards his glasses and stopped about halfway there, hovering over the table, and stayed there. Astrid asked him whether he had revisited it. He said, and this came out with a crack in the middle of it, that it had been going off during the demonstration prep, and there was no way to have it interrupt the customer session. Astrid said she was not asking about March. She was asking whether he had revisited it. He did not answer. Rufus, who had not spoken for 20 minutes, said that he had spent Saturday morning telling 9 separate business owners that we had known about their broken returns for 8.5 hours before we did anything, because that is what the timestamp said, and that he had been apologizing for something he did not understand until about 90 seconds ago. Astrid closed my laptop and slid it back to me and said thank you, and then she asked Emeka to stay and asked everyone else except Ellis to leave. Ellis was not in the building on Wednesday. The formal version was that he had moved off the product. The version that went round the group chat was that he had been walked to the lift by a woman from IT, holding his laptop like a tray. 8 individual logins existed by the following Friday, which took 2 days rather than 6 weeks, and every publish now writes the old list to a dated copy first, because I built that in the same fortnight and Astrid signed it off in 9 minutes. Bram came back tanned and slightly deaf and immediately rewrote the half of the document that had only ever been in his head. On the Thursday, Astrid came and stood at the end of my desk and said she had read a 2-paragraph email from March about 4 times over the weekend and asked what it would take to keep me. I said the underwriter wanted a letter confirming my salary. She said write it, I will sign it, and put a bigger number on it. We got the keys in October. The garden really is the length of a bus. Cara stood in it with a mug in her hand and said, so this is the one the waste industry bought us, and I said don't, and she laughed at me until I laughed too.